New York City received 66.6 million visitors in 2023, a number that sounds like full recovery until you know that the city received 66.9 million visitors in 2019, and that the comparison conceals a fundamental structural change in who those visitors are, where they're spending money, and whether the experience they're finding matches what they expected. The numbers are almost back. The experience is not. Here is why New York tourism is dying, and why no one is coming back the same way twice. The numbers look fine. The composition doesn't. New York City's official tourism body, NYC Tourism Plus Conventions, formerly NYC and Company, reported 66.6 million visitors in 2023. That is 99.6% of 2019's 66.9 million, a recovery that looks essentially complete on paper. The headline number has been used to declare victory. The composition of those visitors tells a different story. International visitors, who historically represent the highest per-day spending of any visitor category, have recovered more slowly than domestic visitors. In 2019, New York received approximately 13.5 million international visitors. The 2023 international visitor count was approximately 12 million, still approximately 11% below 2019. International tourists spend approximately 2 to 3 times what domestic tourists spend per day in New York. They stay longer, eat at more restaurants, shop more, and use hotels for more nights. An 11% gap in international visitors is not an 11% gap in tourism revenue. The specific categories of international travel that have not recovered are revealing. Business travel from Asia, particularly China, has been dramatically reduced. Chinese tourists were the fastest growing international visitor segment in New York before the pandemic, with approximately 1.1 million Chinese visitors annually in the peak years. The combination of the COVID period's relationship damage between China and the United States, the lingering visa difficulties, and China's own economic dynamics has produced a Chinese visitor count to New York that is a fraction of its pre-pandemic level. Group tour travel, which generates specific economic activity for specific New York businesses, including tour bus operators, group rate restaurants, and evening entertainment venues, has also not recovered proportionally. Group tour operators who suspended their New York programs during the pandemic found other destinations in the interim and have not returned at the same rate. The specific spending data tells the recovery story more accurately than visitor counts. NYC Tourism Plus Conventions reported that total visitor spending in New York City reached approximately $74 billion in 2023, compared to approximately $79 billion in 2019, a 6% gap in spending versus a 0.4% gap in visitor counts. The math reflects the composition problem. Fewer of the highest spending visitors, international, group tours, business, and more of the lower spending visitors, domestic day trippers, family visits. The same number of visitors spending less money per visit is not a recovery. It is a replacement of high-value visitors with lower-value visitors at equivalent total head count. The Broadway theater industry captures this composition shift specifically. Broadway grossed approximately $1.8 billion in the 2022 to 2023 season, a record. But the record is partly a function of dramatically higher ticket prices. Average ticket prices have risen significantly since the pandemic, reaching over $130 for an average ticket in recent seasons. More money from fewer higher-paying customers at lower overall seat occupancy than pre-pandemic seasons. The Broadway audience has not returned to its full pre-pandemic scale. The industry has compensated through pricing rather than through volume. What business travel looks like now. Business travel is the pillar of New York's hotel industry that the pandemic most fundamentally disrupted, and it is the pillar whose disruption is most structural rather than temporary. The pandemic proved that a significant proportion of corporate travel to New York was driven by in-person meetings with clients, meetings with counterparties, internal team gatherings that were subsequently demonstrated to be productive via video conference. Companies that maintain productivity during the pandemic without flying to New York have not resumed all of that travel. The reduction is not total. There are categories of business interaction that genuinely require physical presence, but the marginal meetings that generated hotel nights and restaurant meals have been permanently reduced. The specific economic impact. New York hotel occupancy rates recovered to approximately 80 to 85% of 2019 levels by 2023, not to 2019 levels. The rooms that remain unoccupied relative to 2019 are disproportionately the weekday business travel rooms. Weekends have recovered more fully than weekdays in most New York hotels, reflecting the domestic leisure travel recovery. The hotel revenue management term for this is compression. The hotel industry competes harder for fewer high-value weekday nights, producing pricing pressure that simultaneously strains the industry's economics and prices out the marginal business traveler who is already questioning the trip's necessity. The commercial real estate market captures the same structural shift. Manhattan office vacancy rates were approximately 18 to 22% in 2024, the highest sustained level in decades. When the offices that drive the commuter and business visitor economy are 20% empty on an average Tuesday, the restaurants, coffee shops, transit systems, and ancillary businesses that serve that office economy are operating at correspondingly reduced capacity. The Midtown Manhattan lunch economy, one of the highest volume restaurant and food service corridors in the world, has been operating at reduced capacity since 2020 and has not fully recovered. The restaurant industry specifically documents this pattern. The NYC Hospitality Alliance, a restaurant industry trade group, has tracked openings and closings in the 5 boroughs since the pandemic. The closings that occurred during the pandemic and in the immediate post-pandemic period were concentrated in the Midtown corporate lunch and dinner category, the $50 to $100 per person expense account, restaurants whose customer base was office workers and their clients. Many of these did not reopen. The restaurants that replaced them, and the restaurants that have opened since, are disproportionately oriented toward the residential neighborhoods and the evening out dining market, rather than the corporate lunch market. The convention economy provides another data point. New York City's convention and meeting industry, which generates significant hotel occupancy through large group corporate and association events, had fully pre-booked convention calendars through 2022 and 2023 as organizations resumed in-person gatherings. The corporate convention market appeared to have recovered. What industry analysts have subsequently noted is that the meetings are smaller. Associations and corporations are booking the same venues for smaller groups, with more participants attending virtually or not at all, reducing the total hotel room nights generated per event compared to pre-pandemic equivalents. The subway problem. No one wants to talk about honestly. New York subway, the circulatory system of the city's tourism economy, carrying nearly every tourist who arrives at JFK, LaGuardia, or Penn Station to their destination, has been the subject of sustained negative media coverage since the pandemic in ways that directly affect visitor behavior. The documented facts about subway crime. Overall subway crime in 2023 was significantly higher than pre-pandemic 2019, though lower than the 2022 peak. The MTA reported approximately 2,337 major felonies on the subway system in 2022, a number that declined in 2023 with increased enforcement presence. For context, this is in a system that carries approximately 3.5 million daily riders. The per-rider crime rate is low by almost any objective measure, but the specific events that received national and international media coverage, the fatal stabbing of Michelle Go by a stranger at a Times Square subway platform on January 15, 2022, and multiple high-profile assaults on Asian American riders during the same period, were of a character that produced psychological impact beyond their statistical frequency. The media coverage is the specific problem, A tourist in Iowa who reads about a fatal subway platform assault does not calculate the statistical probability of encountering the same. They form an impression that the subway is dangerous, and that impression affects their choice of destination. The MTA and the City of New York have documented that perception of subway safety is a specific deterrent for international tourists who contact tourism agencies and have invested in uniformed police presence specifically to address the perception gap. The experience of using the New York subway in 2024 is genuinely different from 2019 in ways that go beyond crime statistics. The visible presence of people experiencing mental health crises, the encampments at specific stations, and the specific sensory environment of a system that has deferred maintenance through the pandemic. These are documented and observable by any visitor who uses the system. The subway experience is not objectively dangerous for most riders. It is objectively less comfortable and more unpredictable than it was in 2019. And that difference is what visitors bring home and discuss. The MTA has responded to the perception crisis with specific operational changes. Governor Kathy Hochul deployed 1,000 New York National Guard members to the subway system in March 2024, an unprecedented deployment of military personnel to a civilian transit system, specifically to address the perception of public safety. The optics of armed National Guard soldiers patrolling subway stations is itself a communication about the state of the system that international visitors read in a specific way. This is a place the governor believes requires military presence. Whether or not that is the accurate interpretation of the deployment's purpose, it is the impression the deployment creates. The MTA's own internal research has documented that rider perceptions of subway safety are lower than the actual crime statistics would justify, a perception reality gap that the agency has struggled to close. Marketing the subway as safe to tourists who have read about platform assaults is a specific communications challenge that no amount of signage or social media positivity fully resolves. The perceptions are formed by media coverage that is accurate about specific incidents and incomplete about statistical context. New York's primary competitors for international tourism, London, Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, all have subway systems, and all of those systems have their own challenges. The specific advantage those cities maintain over New York in the perception battle is that their major subway incidents have not received the same sustained coverage in American media that New York's have. This is partly because American media covers New York disproportionately to other global cities, which produces a feedback loop. More coverage of New York incidents, more perception of New York danger, more deterrence of New York visits, more visible strain on the city's tourism economy. The cost has gotten ridiculous. New York City has always been expensive. The specific complaint from visitors since 2022 is that it has crossed from expensive into something they were not prepared for and do not plan to repeat. Average hotel room rates in Manhattan reached record highs in 2023 and 2024, with the average daily rate for a Manhattan hotel room crossing $300 in multiple months and peaking above $350 during high-demand periods. A couple visiting New York for 3 nights, staying in a standard hotel, spending on meals and activities, will easily spend $3,000 to $5,000 on the trip. For that budget, they can visit multiple European cities, a Caribbean resort, or 2 domestic beach destinations. The restaurant cost increase has been specifically documented and discussed. A New York restaurant meal that cost $60 per person in 2019, a mid-range sit-down dinner at a non-special occasion restaurant, costs $90 to $120 per person in 2023 after accounting for post-pandemic price increases. Mandatory tip percentages on electronic payment tablets that have risen from 18 to 20% defaults to 20 to 25% defaults, and the additional fees that some restaurants have added for service charges, credit card processing, and a specific New York phenomenon of discretionary surcharges that have proliferated since the pandemic. The specific feedback from visitors that NYC Tourism Plus Conventions has captured in research and that travel writers have documented extensively is the feeling of being nickel and dimed in a way that Paris, London, and other major international cities do not produce at the same intensity. The tip culture expectation that has expanded from restaurants to coffee counter ordering, food kiosks, hotel desk interactions, and essentially any transactional moment in New York, particularly the aggressive tilted tablet screens that present 20/25/30% options before a custom option, is specifically documented in negative visitor reviews as a deterrent to return visits. The tipping culture expansion is a specific post-pandemic phenomenon that began when restaurants introduced payment systems with preset tip options to replace interactions with servers. The technology was adopted during the pandemic as a contactless solution and was retained afterward because the preset tip options generate significantly more gratuity revenue for workers than traditional paper check tipping. The specific customer experience problem is that the expectation has extended to counter service operations, coffee orders, bagel orders, ice cream purchases, where the tradition of tipping did not previously exist. International visitors, who may not have a tipping culture in their home country and who find the American tipping system already confusing, encounter the tablet screen at a bagel counter and experience it as aggressive or confrontational. The broader cost context, the NYC Comptroller's Office and the New York State Hospitality and Tourism Association have both documented that New York's cost disadvantage relative to comparable international destinations has widened since 2019. The euro weakness of 2022 temporarily made New York less expensive for European visitors, but that parity has shifted. For Asian visitors, the fastest growing segment pre-pandemic, the weak yen and other Asian currency dynamics have made New York a significantly more expensive destination than it was in 2019 in local currency terms, which directly affects travel decisions for the segment that was supposed to be New York's fastest growing market. The hotel cost specifically merits attention. New York hotel operators have described the post-pandemic period as the best hotel market they have experienced in decades. Record average daily rates, favorable occupancy, strong revenue per available room. This is good for hotel operators. It is a barrier for the price-sensitive visitor segment that sustained New York's visitor counts at high levels through the 2000s. What homelessness visibility has done to the experience. New York City had an estimated 91,271 people experiencing homelessness in December 2023. With approximately 68,892 of them in the city shelter system, both figures representing records. The visible homeless population, the individuals sleeping in subway cars, in Penn Station, in Grand Central Terminal, in the parks of Midtown and the financial district, is what visitors encounter and what they photograph and discuss when they return home. The specific locations of homeless encampments and individual sleeping situations have shifted repeatedly as the city has conducted enforcement operations that move populations between locations rather than providing solutions to the underlying housing shortage. Penn Station and Grand Central Terminal, two of the three primary points where visitors arrive in Manhattan, have been the focus of specific enforcement and cleaning operations that have reduced but not eliminated the visible population. The tension between New York's identity as a world-class destination and the daily visible reality of its homeless population is not a new tension. New York had significant visible homelessness in the 1980s and 1990s as well. The difference in the current period is the combination of the scale. 91,271 is a documented record. The tourist encounter points, Times Square, Midtown, the subway, and the social media environment in which every visitor can instantly document and share their negative experiences with a global audience. A tourist who encounters a disorienting situation in Times Square in 1989 tells their friends when they get home. A tourist who encounters the same situation in 2024 has it on video, posts it to social media, and reaches an audience of thousands before they have even checked out of the hotel. The specific locations that have generated the most documented visitor concern are Penn Station, Times Square, and the subway platforms adjacent to them. Precisely the locations that first-time visitors encounter within the first 30 minutes of arriving in the city. The sequence for most domestic and international visitors arriving at Penn Station is arrive. Try to navigate Penn Station's documented infrastructural chaos, encounter the street conditions of 8th Avenue and the surrounding blocks, find the subway, navigate to the hotel. This is the first New York experience for millions of visitors, and the current condition of that specific corridor is not what any destination marketing campaign would choose. The Adams administration has acknowledged the Penn Station corridor problem specifically, with multiple initiatives to improve street conditions and enforcement in the areas around Penn Station and Times Square. The results have been measurable, but incomplete. The Times Square Alliance, the business improvement district that manages Times Square, has invested in additional ambassadors, cleaning crews, and programming to improve the street-level experience in the district. The specific visible improvement is real. The challenge is that the improvement is happening against a baseline that declined significantly from 2019 to 2022 and has not fully recovered. Mayor Eric Adams's tenure has been specifically associated with both the homelessness challenge and with the enforcement response to it. His administration has conducted multiple sweep operations, cleared encampments, and deployed law enforcement resources specifically targeted at the tourist-facing public spaces of Manhattan. The scale of the underlying housing and mental health crisis is larger than any enforcement operation can address, and the cleared encampments reconstitute in new locations rather than disappearing from the city system. The competition got better. One of the most underreported reasons that New York's tourism is facing structural headwinds is that the competing destinations have genuinely improved during the same period that New York's difficulties increased. Nashville has been developed as a major tourism destination. The Lower Broadway honky-tonk corridor and the bachelorette party economy have made Nashville one of the fastest-growing weekend leisure destinations in the United States. The domestic tourist who would have gone to New York for a weekend entertainment experience now has compelling alternatives in Nashville, Austin, New Orleans, and Las Vegas that offer specific experiences New York cannot provide. International visitors to the United States who are making their first American trip have increasingly chosen destinations beyond New York and Los Angeles. The National Park System, the Pacific Northwest, the American Southwest, and Florida have all seen international visitor growth as the range of American experiences that international tourists seek has diversified. The tourist who previously went to New York because it was the American city with the most global cultural presence still goes, but the tourist who goes to America specifically for natural experiences and space is no longer defaulting to New York. The post-pandemic revenge travel period, the 2022 to 2023 surge of travel spending by people who had deferred trips for 2 years disproportionately benefited international destinations rather than domestic ones. Americans and international travelers spent the revenge travel budget on Europe, Japan, Southeast Asia, and other destinations where the cost-to-experience ratio was perceived as favorable. New York competed in this environment as a destination whose costs had risen substantially while its experience quality had declined. As tourism researcher and NYU hospitality professor Jonathan Grella described the competitive landscape in 2023, New York's brand is still the strongest in American tourism. But a strong brand does not automatically translate into choice when the value proposition has shifted. People love New York. they're choosing to love it from a distance. The specific Nashville phenomenon is worth documenting because it is the clearest domestic competition story. Nashville's Lower Broadway strip of honky-tonks, a concentrated entertainment district with live music and dozens of bars operating simultaneously from noon until 2 a.m. every day, created a specific entertainment product that has no equivalent in New York. The bachelorette party economy that Nashville has captured represents millions of dollars per year in group leisure travel from exactly the demographic that also books New York weekend trips. Women in their 20s and 30s with disposable income, traveling in groups of 8 to 15. Nashville offers them a specific entertainment experience in a walkable area with lower hotel costs and a culture of celebration that New York's more diffuse and expensive entertainment landscape cannot replicate at the same price point. The Las Vegas residency model has further fragmented the entertainment travel market. Celine Dion, Adele, Katy Perry, Bruno Mars, the artists whose touring used to anchor major concert trips to cities including New York, now perform in Las Vegas residencies that generate their own tourism draw. A family or couple who would travel to New York to see a major artist can now make the trip to Las Vegas instead, where the entertainment is combined with the casino hotel dining complex that Las Vegas offers. The specific New York advantage: access to the most artists, the most shows, the most variety, has been partially diluted by the concentration of major artists in Las Vegas. International destinations have similarly invested in improving their tourist experience during the period when New York's was declining. Japan reopened to international tourism in October 2022 after 2 years of pandemic closure, and the response was one of the most significant redirections of international tourism spending in recent memory. Millions of travelers who had been planning Japan trips redirected there, and Japan's combination of extraordinary cultural experience, food culture, and favorable yen exchange rate absorbed a significant proportion of the high-spending international tourists that New York had been competing for. What New York tourism actually looks like now. The truthful picture of New York City tourism in 2025 is neither the collapse that the video title suggests, nor the full recovery that the headline numbers imply. It is a city whose visitor numbers are close to their pre-pandemic peak, but whose visitor mix, spending patterns, and the economic distribution of tourism revenue have changed in ways that may not fully reverse. The city has genuine assets that no other American destination replicates: the density of world-class museums, the concentration of Broadway theater, the food culture that remains the most diverse and the most extraordinary in the country, the specific character of its neighborhoods, and the physical scale of a city where every walk produces encounters that exist nowhere else. These are not diminished by the pandemic's aftermath. They are as real as they have ever been. What has changed is the friction, the cost, the subway experience, the visible street conditions, the tipping culture that visitors encounter between the assets. Every city has friction. New York's friction has increased while its competitors has stayed the same or decreased. The tourist who loved New York in 2015 and comes back in 2025 is encountering the same extraordinary city with substantially more friction than they remember, and the memory of the friction outlasts the memory of the extraordinary. The specific demographic that New York tourism has lost most significantly is the repeat middle-income domestic visitor, the family from Ohio or the couple from Texas who came to New York every few years for a special trip. For this visitor, the cost increase has been the deciding factor. The same trip that cost $2,500 in 2019 costs $4,000 in 2025, and there are other options at $2,500. International visitors are partially compensating for this loss. The European and Asian visitors who remain are high spending and represent genuine economic value. But the base of regular repeat domestic visitors is the specific category that is most changed, and rebuilding it requires either a reversal of the cost trajectory or a recalibration of what New York offers for the price. Neither is occurring quickly. The New York City government has responded with investment in the tourism experience that is documented and real. Times Square has seen ongoing private and public investment in its infrastructure and programming. The Hudson Yards development has added new tourism-oriented retail, dining, and the vessel attraction to the far west side of Midtown. The High Line continues to draw visitors who find the elevated park experience genuinely distinctive. Central Park, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the American Museum of Natural History, the Museum of Modern Art, the fundamental cultural institutions of New York's tourism product remain as extraordinary as they have ever been. What has not been resolved is the daily experience of the first-time or returning visitor who arrives at JFK or Newark Airport, takes the air train and subway to their hotel, passes through Penn Station or Times Square at night, navigates the street-level retail environment of Midtown, and forms their impression of what New York in 2025 actually is. The gap between New York's brand, what visitors are expecting based on 30 years of media representation of the city, and New York's current street-level experience is the specific brand damage that tourism recovery figures cannot fully capture. The travel review platform data tells this story most specifically. TripAdvisor and Google review aggregations of New York hotel and attraction reviews since 2022 show increasing frequency of comments about the subway experience, about street conditions, and about cost relative to expectation. The specific language that recurs in negative reviews, "Not what I expected," "Won't be returning," "Beautiful city, but the experience was exhausting," describes the friction gap between brand and experience that is the core of New York's tourism challenge. New York City's Tourism Commission and the Mayor's Office acknowledge this gap in careful language that stops short of fully describing it. Strategic plans reference improving the visitor experience, addressing quality of life concerns, and supporting the economic conditions that make New York an attractive destination. None of these acknowledge what the visitor data actually says, which is that the friction has increased enough to change the repeat visit calculus for a meaningful and documented segment of the visitor base. The number is 66.6 million, almost exactly where it was in 2019, but different international composition, less business travel, higher costs, a subway whose perception has shifted, record homelessness, and better competition from every direction. New York City is not dying. New York tourism is not dying. But something about the transaction between the city and the visitor has changed, and the people who run the tourism economy have not fully admitted it yet. Hit that like button and subscribe. More content like this coming.